President Donald J. Trump on Thursday threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807, a rarely used federal law that would allow him to deploy U.S. military forces on American soil, as unrest in Minnesota intensified following aggressive immigration enforcement actions and fatal shootings by federal agents. Trump's warning, issued on his social media platform, Truth Social, came amid several days of protests in Minneapolis sparked by a surge of immigration agents, including thousands of Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) and Customs and Border Protection personnel, brought to the state under the Trump administration's Operation Metro Surge. If the corrupt politicians of Minnesota don't obey the law and stop the professional agitators and insurrectionists from attacking the patriots of ICE, who are only trying to do their job, I will institute the Insurrection Act, Trump wrote, framing the unrest as a threat to federal law enforcement and warning that military intervention could be imminent. The current crisis stems from a series of confrontations between residents and federal agents. On January 7, Renee Nicole Good, a 37-year-old American citizen, was shot and killed by an ICE agent during a controversial enforcement operation in Minneapolis. That killing drew national attention and widespread condemnation, leading to protests across the Twin Cities. Tensions further escalated this week after another federal officer shot a man in the leg during an immigration enforcement operation. The Department of Homeland Security characterized the encounter as self-defense after the man allegedly resisted arrest and assaulted an officer with a shovel and broom handle. Local officials and community leaders have decried the federal response. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey called the situation unsustainable, noting that nearly 3,000 federal agents now operate in a city with about 600 local police officers. Frey urged protesters to remain peaceful even as criticism mounted against the federal presence. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz also appealed for calm, calling on Trump to turn the temperature down and urging residents to protest peacefully. The Insurrection Act, enacted in 1807, grants the president authority to deploy federal troops domestically to suppress civil disorder, insurrection, or rebellion under specific conditions. It serves as a legal exception to the Posse Comitatus Act, which generally prohibits the use of active-duty military forces for routine law enforcement on U.S. soil. Historically, the law has been invoked about 30 times, most recently in 1992 after the Los Angeles riots that followed the Rodney King verdict. Typically, its use has involved requests from state governors or been tied to civil rights enforcement, but invoking it without state consent, as Trump has threatened, would be unprecedented in recent decades. Legal experts have noted that, although the president has broad discretion under the statute, its application could face significant legal challenges, particularly if deployed against the wishes of state officials. Trump's threat has ignited sharp debate nationwide. Supporters argue the president is justified in restoring order amid what they view as chaotic protests and resistance to federal law enforcement. Critics, including some Democratic leaders and commentators, have condemned the move as heavy-handed and disproportionate, arguing peaceful protest does not constitute insurrection. The television personality Whoopi Goldberg, for example, said during The View that protesting is not an insurrection, emphasizing the constitutional right to dissent. Minnesota's U.S. Representative Betty McCollum publicly rejected Trump's threats, warning that deploying federal troops would escalate tensions and encroach on civil rights. Meanwhile, lawsuits filed by Minnesota and other jurisdictions are already challenging federal actions in court, underscoring the complex legal battleground surrounding enforcement tactics and potential military involvement. As Minnesota braces for another night of protests, the nation watches closely. Whether Trump will follow through on invoking the Insurrection Act remains unclear, but the president's threat has sharply divided opinion and heightened scrutiny of federal authority, immigration enforcement, and the boundaries of executive power. In a dramatic turn that has eased immediate fears of direct U.S. military action, Iran appears to have averted American strikes by pledging not to carry out executions of detained protesters, following intense pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump. The development, reported Thursday by Bloomberg, comes amid one of the most severe periods of domestic unrest in Iran in decades, a wave of protests triggered late last year that has since drawn global attention and condemnation for the regime's violent response. On Wednesday, Trump told reporters that he had been informed the killing in Iran is stopping, and that he would be very upset if authorities resumed the crackdown. The comments marked a notable shift from earlier in the week, when Trump had encouraged Iranian demonstrators to keep up the pressure on their government and hinted that help is on the way, fueling speculation about potential U.S. military options. Oil markets responded to the apparent de-escalation. Brent crude prices fell sharply, ending a nearly week-long ascent as traders reacted to lower expectations of a disruptive conflict involving Iran and its key role in global energy flows. Iran's judiciary delivered a key concession by ruling out a death sentence for 26-year-old protester Irfan Sultani, a case that had become emblematic of international concerns about executions of dissenters. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi reiterated to U.S. media that there were no plans for hanging protesters, explicitly framing capital punishment as out of the question. The shift in rhetoric was mirrored in broader diplomatic channels, with Ankara's foreign minister publicly opposing military intervention and urging both Tehran and Washington toward dialogue. Iran has been rocked by widespread demonstrations sparked by economic hardship and dissatisfaction with clerical rule. Human rights organizations and independent monitors say the regime's crackdown has led to thousands of deaths and tens of thousands of arrests, figures that have intensified global scrutiny and calls for restraint. Earlier in the week, White House officials warned Tehran of grave consequences if executions and violent repression continued, with the U.S. insisting that all options, including military ones, remained on the table. Regional allies such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, and Egypt reportedly urged the Trump administration against striking Iran, warning that doing so could destabilize the entire Middle East and trigger economic fallout. While the pledge to halt executions has momentarily defused the most immediate threat of U.S. military action, tensions remain high. The White House has continued to impose new sanctions on Iranian officials connected to the crackdown, and Trump has reiterated that Washington is closely monitoring the situation on the ground. Analysts caution that Iran's assurances may be tactical, and that the potential for further violence or punitive action from Washington cannot be ruled out. Tehran, for its part, has warned it would respond decisively to any aggression by the U.S. or its allies, underscoring the volatile mix of domestic protest and geopolitical maneuvering that continues to define the crisis. And now, you know the news.